Imagine it is 3 in the morning and somewhere on a container ship crossing the North Atlantic, an alarm has just started singing. Not loud, not the kind that wakes the whole crew, just a single, sharp warning tone in a small, cool room deep below the accommodation block where the switchboards hum and the transformers give off that low, mechanical breath that never quite stops. A red light is blinking on a panel the size of a wall. Outside the hull, there is nothing. No harbor, no workshop, no other ship for hundreds of miles in any direction. And somewhere in that steel city of 25 sleeping people, one person is pulling on coveralls, picking up a torch and a small yellow tester, and walking toward that alarm. Because on this ship, tonight, keeping every single volt of power flowing is his job, and his job alone. That is exactly what we are going to find out today. Hi, my name is Jack, and this is Life at Sea, the channel where we go inside the lives of the people who live and work at sea. Now, before we get any further into this, I want to be clear about who we are actually talking about today. The person we are talking about today is not the shore electrician who wires your house, not the industrial Sparky who spends 9 to 5 in a factory. The person we are talking about today is the one licensed electrical officer on a 300-meter ship 3 days from the nearest port, who is responsible for keeping every single circuit alive, every single alarm working, and every single motor turning on a piece of infrastructure the size of a small town. The reality of keeping the lights on when there is no shore to call. On a standard deep-sea merchant vessel, the electrical system runs at 440 volts, 3-phase at 60 hertz. Every motor, every pump, every galley oven, every anchor, windlass hangs off that system. The lighting circuits run, step down to 220. The control and alarm circuits run at 110. The starting batteries and the emergency lighting live on 24 volts. And on a modern cruise ship, it gets more serious than that. Once total generator capacity climbs above about 20 megawatts, the medium voltage network runs at 6.6 or 11 kilovolts, which is genuinely enough to kill you across a small air gap without touching anything at all. Now, the ship's electrotechnical officer is the one licensed person responsible for every layer of that. And here is something a lot of people do not realize. On most deep-sea cargo ships, there is only one of him, not a team, not a shift. One. He does not stand a traditional engine room watch. Instead, he works a daily shift and is on call 24 hours a day, every day of a contract that on most vessels runs 6 to 9 months. And the environment is fighting him the whole time. Salt air is corroding every terminal that is not perfectly sealed. Humidity is quietly dropping the insulation resistance on cable runs that have not been touched in a decade. Constant hull vibration is loosening every screw connection in every junction box on the ship. Ask any old chief engineer who has done a full North Atlantic winter on a Maersk or Hapag-Lloyd cargo run, and he will tell you the same thing. The sea does not sit still, and nothing electrical on a ship stays exactly where you left it. And you can hear it if you know how to listen. In the small workshop deep in the accommodation block, at 3 in the morning, the ship talks. The distant thump of the main engine 3 decks below. The higher pitched whine of a switchboard cooling fan. The slow, rhythmic creak of steel plates under a long Atlantic swell. Any working electrical officer will tell you that after a few contracts on the same ship, he can almost diagnose the problem by listening at the workshop door for 30 seconds before he ever picks up a tool. And when something does go wrong, there is no wholesaler to phone, there is no next day delivery, There is no local electrician who can come down and give you a hand for an hour. If the ship is 3 days out from the nearest port and a main switchboard breaker develops a fault at midnight, that fault is being fixed by one person with the spares that are already on board using tools that have been living in a workshop drawer for the whole contract. Trust me, that is a genuinely serious kind of quiet. And it sits on that one person's shoulders the whole way across. Because if he gets it wrong, the ship goes dark. And a ship that goes dark out there loses steering, loses navigation lights, loses radar, and loses the refrigeration on hundreds of reefer containers full of somebody else's cargo, all at the same time. That is the weight of the job. The first layer of how they actually make this work is the power plant itself. A typical deep sea cargo vessel carries 3 or 4 diesel generator sets, each one coupling a medium-speed diesel engine to a synchronous alternator, all feeding the main switchboard. At any given moment, one is online, one is on standby, and the rest are available. A power management system handles the automatic synchronizing, load sharing between machines, and the load shedding priorities when supply gets tight. When the plant needs another generator, the power management system starts it, matches voltage, frequency, and phase angle, and closes the breaker at minimal slip, cleanly, without drama. Then, physically separated from all of that, in its own compartment above the uppermost continuous deck, sits the emergency generator. It has its own fuel tank, its own ventilation, and its own bank of 24-volt starting batteries. Under the safety of life at sea convention, it has to come on load within 45 seconds of a total blackout. And it has to have at least 2 independent starting methods, usually battery and hydraulic. So even if the main engine room floods, or catches fire, or loses fuel, that emergency machine will come alive and feed the steering gear, the radar, the fire pump, and the emergency lighting. The rhythm of a working electrical officer's day is more predictable than most people realize. Most days, he is up at 7, breakfast in the officer's mess by past, and down in the engine control room for the 8 o'clock toolbox meeting with the second engineer and the chief. Jobs are handed out. Then the round starts. He walks the engine room, notebook in hand, checking motor amperages against last week's readings, running insulation tests on the 24-volt, 110-volt, 220-volt, and 440-volt systems, watching the alarm monitor for anything drifting off its normal band. That is where the mastery lives, not in the dramatic fix at 3 in the morning. In the fact that on a good ship, 3 in the morning almost never happens, because on Tuesday afternoon he noticed that a bilge pump motor was drawing 3 amps more than it did the week before, and stripped it before it burned. Then there is the Saturday routine. Every Saturday, on almost every ship in the world, the electrical officer runs a fixed test list. Battery health, fire alarm system, emergency generators start on batteries, emergency fire pump, lifeboat engine starting circuits, life-saving appliance electrical checks. Most veteran chief engineers will tell you plainly that the Saturday routine is what actually keeps ships alive. It is boring and repetitive, and it works. And behind all of that sits a design philosophy. The main switchboard is not one continuous bus bar. It is split into 2 or more sections, connected by a tie breaker. If one section develops a fault, the tie opens, and the other section keeps feeding the ship. Load shedding tables are baked in so that if the plant gets short of power, the accommodation air conditioning and the galley non-essentials drop off first, and steering and the navigation system stay on regardless. Blackout recovery logic knows the exact order in which to restart every consumer once the bus is live again. First, the standby generator comes up to speed and takes the dead bus. Then the essential services start in a set sequence, largest first, with a small delay between each one so that no single motor's inrush current knocks the plant out again. Honestly, when you actually watch it happen, It is a genuinely elegant piece of engineering. Scale all of that up, and you land on a modern cruise ship, a Royal Caribbean Oasis-class vessel, or one of the new Virgin Voyages ships built by Fincantieri in Italy, runs 2 ABB Azipod pods pushing a combined 32 megawatts of propulsion, fed by a medium voltage ring network that ABB has been building on cruise ships since the late 1990s. The philosophy is the same. It is just running at 10 times the voltage, and it takes a team of 3 to 5 electrical officers on board instead of 1. Honestly, some of these plants are genuinely elegant when you actually see them working. And then there is the smaller layer, the personal one, because for all the switchgear and single-line diagrams, an electrical officer's work at sea comes down to a handful of small objects that live with him for years. The first one is always the insulation tester, usually a Megger 1 kilovolt handheld or a Fluke 1587 that lives in the workshop drawer with a scratched yellow case and a leather strap that has been resoldered twice. Megger has been making these things for over 130 years, and any working electrical officer will tell you the tester in his drawer knows the ship better than he does. Every Tuesday it comes out, every Tuesday it goes back, and the readings go into a specific little notebook. That notebook is the second object. Every electrical officer worth the rank keeps one, not the official maintenance log the company wants, that lives on the computer. This is the personal one, an ordinary small hardback where he writes down the quirks of this particular ship. The earth fault that only appears when the galley oven and the accommodation air conditioning run at the same time. The reefer socket in Bay 43 that trips its breaker when the ship rolls to port in heavy weather. The generator that sinks a little slower than the other 3. That notebook is worth more than any manual because ships are unique. Even sister ships from the same yard, built the same year, have different retrofits, different repair histories, different old scars. Ask any veteran electrical officer who has moved between operators, from a Stena tanker in the North Sea to a bulk carrier working the Bering Sea, and he will tell you that every ship has to be learned all over again. That notebook is how he learns it. The third object is a chunky yellow thermal imaging camera clipped to a lanyard that he runs over every switchboard and every motor housing during the weekly round. A hot terminal glows on that screen long before it fails, and long before a human hand would ever feel it through a metal enclosure. There is a genuine quiet satisfaction in catching a bad crimp 2 weeks before it becomes a fire. And the fourth, the smallest one, is the rag in the back pocket. Every electrical officer has one. Cotton, always. Never synthetic. Cotton absorbs and does not spark and does not melt into your skin if you brush a hot bar by mistake. Then there are the small habits. The tools laid out in a specific order in the workshop drawer, because when the alarm goes off at 3 in the morning, you cannot afford to hunt. The photo of family taped inside the locker door. The particular album that plays quietly on a battered Bluetooth speaker while doing paperwork. Honestly, the way that little workshop gets personalized over a 6-month contract is its own quiet kind of home. Now look, this would not be a life at sea video if we were not straight with you about both sides. So let's be honest. The electrical officer's job at sea, for all its craft, has some genuinely hard corners. The first one is professional isolation. On most merchant ships, he is the only electrical specialist on board. There is no senior electrical officer to check his thinking. There is no peer to bounce a fault theory off at midnight. The chief engineer is a mechanical engineer by training, not an electrical one, and while he is a professional colleague, he is not another electrician. That solitude is one of the least discussed pressures in the whole industry. The second is that he is on call around the clock for the whole length of the contract. 6 months, sometimes 9, and the industry has a real ongoing conversation about whether contracts of 8 or 9 months are compatible with good mental health at all. even where they sit inside the limits set by the Maritime Labor Convention of 2006. Recent research from the Seafarers Happiness Index and academic studies has found that over 40% of seafarers report depressive symptoms, and more than half report meaningful anxiety at some point in their career. That is not a soft finding. That is a working reality across a globally, internationally crewed industry. And then there is the family cost, which cuts every seafarer the same way, regardless of rank. Watching children grow up in video calls that freeze every few minutes because the satellite bandwidth is stretched thin across a whole crew. Missing birthdays, funerals, first days of school, the small fabric of a life that cannot be rescheduled. Modern port turnarounds on a big container run are often measured in hours, not days, so shore leave in the old sense, wandering a port city for an afternoon, is largely gone. You come off the ship at the end of the contract, or you do not come off at all. And underneath all of that, quietly, the high voltage side of the work is genuinely dangerous. A 6.6 kilovolt bus can kill without contact. That is why the regulations are absolute about who is allowed to switch it, and why a certified physical human still has to be the one to do it. It is one of the reasons a working electrical officer's calm is not just a personality trait. It is trained in, over years, because a hurried decision at a live switchboard has real physical consequences. Now, this whole role is also changing. The newer generation of ships coming out of the big European yards, the Virgin Voyages fleet at Fincantieri, the newest classes for Royal Caribbean and Carnival, are all running full ABB integrated power plant concepts, with remote monitoring feeding into ABB's collaborative operations centers ashore. Predictive analytics flag a degrading motor winding weeks before it fails. A shore-based engineer can look at the same alarm history the electrical officer is looking at in real time from an office in Helsinki or Genoa. On the merchant side, the move is toward higher voltages, more automation, and more integrated diagnostics. Compare that against the 1970s tanker era, when a large ship might have carried a chief electrician and 2 or 3 electrical assistants running big direct current generators with mostly analog controls, and the electrical department felt like a small workshop with a payroll. The chief electrician on a very large crude carrier of that era might spend a full morning topping up the electrolyte in a whole bank of enormous lead-acid batteries. He would synchronize generators onto the bus by hand, watching 2 synchronizing lamps flicker slowly into darkness as the phase angles matched, and closing the breaker on feel. Repairs went right down to component level, with a soldering iron and a stock of spare capacitors and transistors. Today, one electrical officer covers, on his own, the electrical work of what used to be a small department on a ship with 100 times more electronics on board. And here is the surprising part. Automation has not shrunk the role, it has grown it. The consensus across working chief engineers is that every new automation layer, every new sensor bus, every new drive is another thing that needs to be understood, calibrated, and diagnosed. High voltage switching still requires a certified physical human because the regulations and the liability are absolute. And an intermittent earth fault that appears only when the vessel rolls to starboard, only in humid weather, only when the accommodation load is high, is detective work no algorithm has yet replaced. Which is genuinely impressive when you think about it, because it means the craft, the eye, the notebook, all of that still matters. So the next time you see a container ship on the horizon at dusk, or a cruise ship coming into a port at night with every deck light burning, remember something. Somewhere below those lit portholes, in a small workshop that smells faintly of hot metal and cable insulation, one person, on his own, is quietly keeping every single volt flowing. The alarm you imagined at the start of this video at 3 in the morning in the middle of an ocean is not chaos. It is a system doing exactly what generations of engineers and one specific person on that ship tonight built it to do. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to Life at Sea for a lot more content just like this. And if you have ever worked as a ship's electrician, sailed with one, or have a family member who has spent a career in the engine department, drop it in the comments below. I would genuinely love to hear it. Thanks for watching.